What if the very first moments of Avengers Endgame were never meant to be an ending at all? What if that calm, almost uncomfortable peace we witnessed wasn't a reward for sacrifice, but a warning disguised as closure? And what if the smallest presence in that opening scene, the one nobody questioned, the one nobody feared, was actually the key to the darkest future the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever hinted at? Imagine realizing that the true beginning of Doomsday wasn't announced with explosions or chaos, but with silence, warmth, and a child in Tony Stark's arms. And imagine discovering that one man, Steve Rogers, saw it coming long before anyone else even knew what to look for. The opening of Avengers Endgame has always felt strangely out of place. Not because it was bad, not because it lacked emotion, but because it carried a tone that the MCU rarely allows itself to sustain. Peace. Real peace. The kind that feels earned on the surface, yet unsettling when you look at it closely. Tony Stark, a man forged by trauma, loss, and responsibility, is suddenly standing in a moment where nothing seems broken. No alarms, no urgency, no ticking clock. Just quiet, familiar warmth. Peggy beside him. A home that feels lived in rather than defended. And most importantly, a newborn child cradled gently in his arms, framed not as background detail, but as the emotional center of the moment. The camera doesn't rush past it. It lingers. It insists that you notice. And in the MCU, when the story insists, it's never accidental. Marvel has always used openings as promises. The beginning of a film isn't just a setup, it's a contract with the audience. This is what matters. This is what you should remember. So when Endgame begins not with devastation, but with domestic stillness, it quietly breaks the pattern. That choice alone should make us uneasy, because peace in this universe is never free. It is borrowed, and borrowed peace always comes with interest. The theory begins here, not with multiversal chaos or cosmic villains, but with a single decision that never happens on screen. Tony Stark does not sacrifice himself. Somewhere, somewhen, that choice changes. Whether through interference, delay, or foreknowledge, the snap that was meant to end him doesn't. And that single divergence fractures the timeline in a way far more dangerous than any Infinity Stone ever could. This opening scene is not the aftermath of victory. It is the birth of an alternate timeline, one that survives because it shouldn't exist. Tony Stark has always been defined by one instinct above all others: control. From building weapons to building suits, from creating Ultron to designing time travel safeguards, Tony never truly trusts outcomes he doesn't design himself. His sacrifice in the sacred timeline is the one moment where he lets go, where he accepts uncertainty for the sake of everyone else. Remove that moment, and you don't get a happier Tony, you get a Tony who lives with unfinished equations, unresolved futures, and the unbearable knowledge that survival has consequences he hasn't calculated yet. That knowledge changes a man, especially when it sits in his arms, wrapped in innocence. The child is never named in the opening, and that absence matters. Names in Marvel define legacy. This child isn't introduced as a character. He's introduced as potential, as something unfinished. Tony doesn't look at the child the way a man looks at peace. He looks at him the way an engineer looks at a system that must be protected at all costs. And in that look lies the first crack. Because Tony Stark doesn't just love, he prepares, he anticipates, he plans for threats that don't exist yet, and in doing so, he creates them. The camera returns to the baby again, not with dialogue, not with exposition, just framing. Marvel's quiet way of telling us, remember this face, even if you don't know why yet. In a universe that has trained us to fear glowing artifacts and godlike beings, the most dangerous thing is introduced without spectacle. No music swell, no ominous line, just life continuing. And that is exactly how the greatest disasters begin. Elsewhere in this timeline, Steve Rogers feels something is wrong long before he can explain it. Steve has always been Marvel's moral compass, but what makes him dangerous isn't his strength, it's his intuition. He understands cause and effect in ways others don't. He knows that every victory leaves a shadow, and the longer this peace lasts, the more that shadow grows. Steve's discomfort isn't rooted in fear of enemies, it's rooted in familiarity. He's lived through false endings before. World War II didn't end evil, it reshaped it. Hydra didn't die, it hid. Thanos wasn't defeated because the universe learned a lesson. He was defeated because one man paid the price. Remove that price, and Steve knows instinctively that the lesson remains unlearned. This is where the theory deepens. Steve doesn't confront Tony. He doesn't accuse him, because Steve Rogers understands something fundamental. You don't warn a man like Tony Stark about the future. You watch him. You observe what he builds, and you prepare for what he refuses to see. The handshake between Tony Stark and Nick Fury, easily dismissed as a moment of trust, becomes something else entirely in this context. Fury isn't a man who believes in coincidence. Every alliance he forms is a contingency. This handshake is not about rebuilding the Avengers. It's about safeguarding a variable that could destabilize everything: the child. Tony's legacy isn't armor anymore, it's blood. And Fury understands that protecting that bloodline may one day mean protecting the universe from it. Tony, meanwhile, begins quietly altering the world. Not dramatically, not publicly. Subtle upgrades to global defense systems, quiet investments in predictive technology, early experiments into timeline stabilization, all justified as protection, all rooted in the same fear that the universe nearly ended once, and it must never be allowed to come that close again. This is the seed of Doomsday, because when protection becomes absolute, freedom becomes expendable. As the child grows, so does Tony's vigilance. He doesn't raise a hero, he raises a solution, a mind shaped by foresight, trained to see inevitability rather than choice. Tony teaches him not how to fight, but how to calculate outcomes where fighting becomes unnecessary. And in doing so, he unknowingly teaches the most dangerous lesson of all, that morality is a variable, not a constant. Steve watches from a distance. Every visit, every conversation, every silence. He notices how Tony speaks about the future, not as something shared, but as something owned. And Steve, more than anyone, understands the danger of a single man deciding what the world needs to become. The multiverse begins to respond. Small inconsistencies appear. Events that shouldn't happen do. Timelines that should collapse persist. The universe, strained by the existence of a timeline that escaped its intended sacrifice, begins to compensate. And compensation in a multiversal system doesn't look like balance, it looks like convergence. This is where the idea of Dr. Doom enters, not as a man, but as a role. A necessary antagonist shaped by inevitability. Doom isn't born evil, he's born necessary. A force that emerges when intelligence surpasses empathy, when solutions replace people, and when a child raised as an answer grows into a ruler of outcomes rather than lives. Steve doesn't fight Doom because Doom is a villain. He fights Doom because Doom is the future Steve failed to stop early enough. A future born not from hatred, but from love taken too far. From a father who wanted to save everyone, and a son who learned that saving everyone sometimes means deciding who doesn't deserve saving at all. By the end of this act, the peace of the opening scene no longer feels comforting. It feels fragile, artificial, like the calm surface of water hiding something vast and unstoppable beneath it. Tony Stark is alive. The world is safe. The child laughs. And somewhere deep in the structure of reality, the universe begins counting down, not to destruction, but to correction. Because the Endgame didn't end, it only learned how to wait. Time moves differently in a timeline that should not exist. It stretches, bends, and compresses around moments of consequence, as if reality itself is unsure whether to allow them to happen. Tony Stark's survival becomes one of those moments, an anomaly that refuses to resolve. The world doesn't collapse immediately. In fact, it thrives. Technology advances faster than ever before. Global threats diminish. Wars are predicted before they begin and neutralized before the first shot is fired. From the outside, this is Tony Stark's greatest success. A world that no longer needs Avengers because it no longer allows disasters to grow large enough to demand them. But inside that success is something far more dangerous than chaos: certainty. Tony doesn't see himself as a ruler or a god. He sees himself as a guardian of inevitability. Every system he builds is designed not to dominate, but to prevent. Prevent invasions, prevent extinction-level events, prevent choices that could lead to irreversible loss. The problem is that prevention requires prediction, and prediction requires narrowing the range of acceptable futures. Slowly, quietly, the future becomes smaller, safer, controlled. And in that narrowing space, Tony's son grows up. He grows surrounded not by toys, but by simulations. Not by fairy tales, but by probability models. Tony doesn't push him toward heroism, he pushes him toward understanding. Understanding systems, understanding human behavior, understanding why people fail even when they mean well. The child learns early that the world isn't saved by hope, it's saved by preparation. Tony believes this is wisdom. Steve Rogers recognizes it as something else entirely. Steve sees what Tony refuses to acknowledge. The absence of choice is not peace. It's stagnation wearing a smile. As the boy matures, the multiverse reacts more aggressively. Variants appear where they shouldn't. Timelines intersect briefly, then recoil, like nerves responding to pain. Strange anomalies draw the attention of forces far older than Earth. The universe is attempting to course correct, and every attempt makes the anomaly more pronounced. Because the root cause isn't an object or an event, it's a lineage. This is where doom stops being a possibility and starts becoming an inevitability. The son doesn't resent Tony, he reveres him, and that reverence becomes the most dangerous inheritance of all. He studies his father's mistakes not to avoid them, but to refine them. Ultron wasn't wrong, he concludes. Ultron was premature. Time travel wasn't dangerous, it was incomplete. The Avengers weren't flawed because they fought. They were flawed because they reacted instead of deciding. This is the philosophical birth of doom. Not a tyrant craving power, but a strategist convinced that free will is humanity's most unstable flaw. The son sees timelines the way Tony once saw suits, as versions to be optimized. He understands that every universe eventually destroys itself through indecision, and he believes genuinely that someone intelligent enough, detached enough, must be willing to choose the least destructive path for everyone else. Steve confronts Tony at last, not with accusations, but with questions. Questions Tony doesn't want to answer. Why does every future model end with centralized control? Why does every scenario that allows human unpredictability result in collapse? Tony dismisses it as realism. Steve calls it surrender. Their disagreement isn't loud, it's worse than that, it's quiet. Because both men believe they are protecting the world. And when two protectors disagree on what protection means, compromise becomes impossible. The son listens, always listening, always learning. Nick Fury disappears from the public eye around this time, not because he's done, but because he understands something terrifying. The Avengers were never meant to stop Doom. They were meant to delay him. Fury realizes that the moment Tony survived, the clock reset. Not toward peace, but toward a future that requires a villain intelligent enough to manage infinity. Dr. Doom is not a name yet, it's a function. As the son steps further into Tony's legacy, he begins working on something Tony never finished. Not armor, not AI, but convergence. A system capable of aligning fractured timelines into a single, stable reality. One truth, one outcome, one controlled future. He doesn't call it domination, he calls it mercy. The multiverse fights back. Incursions intensify. Entire realities blink out like dying stars. Beings who exist outside time take notice. And in the center of it all stands a young man wearing the face of stark brilliance and the mind of something colder, something sharper. He realizes that if the universe insists on chaos, then the universe itself must be corrected. This is where the armor appears, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. A mask not to hide identity, but to remove it. Tony was always personal, emotional, attached. The son understands that attachment creates hesitation, so he sheds it. He becomes Doom not to terrify the world, but to distance himself from it. Doom doesn't mourn timelines. Doom preserves outcomes. Steve Rogers faces him for the first time not as Captain America, but as a man confronting the future he helped enable. The fight isn't about strength, it's about ideology. Doom doesn't hate Steve, he respects him, but respect doesn't stop inevitability. Doom tells Steve something that echoes like a verdict. The Avengers saved the universe once. He will save it forever. Steve realizes the truth too late. Doom isn't undoing Tony Stark. He is completing him. Tony sees it at last. The realization hits not as fear, but as regret. Everything he built to protect the world taught his son that the world must be controlled to survive. Tony understands now that survival without freedom isn't victory, it's postponement. But Doom no longer needs Tony's approval or his presence. The multiverse stands on the edge of alignment. Billions of choices narrowing into one. Doom prepares to do what no being has ever successfully done. And chaos not through destruction, but through decision. And Steve Rogers, standing alone against a future born from love, finally understands why this fight feels so personal. Because Doom isn't the enemy of the Avengers. The end doesn't arrive like an explosion, it arrives like silence. Doom stands at the center of everything Tony Stark ever feared and ever wanted, a universe that can no longer hurt itself. Timelines stop colliding, possibilities stop branching. For the first time since creation, reality feels stable. And that's when Steve Rogers understands the most terrifying truth of all. Doom has already won. Not by force, not by conquest, but by logic so flawless that resistance feels irresponsible. Tony faces the final consequence of his legacy without armor, without genius, without answers. He sees his son not as a monster, but as a mirror, one that reflects every compromise Tony ever made in the name of safety. Doom tells him this was never about power, it was about responsibility. Someone had to decide which futures deserve to exist. Someone had to be strong enough to live with that burden. Tony realizes too late that by teaching the universe to rely on him, he taught it to demand a replacement. Steve makes the final stand not to defeat Doom, but to remind him of something even control cannot erase. Choice only matters when it's allowed to fail. The moment Doom hesitates, even for a second, the universe breathes again. That hesitation doesn't destroy Doom, it humanizes him. And in that fragile pause, the timelines fracture just enough to escape total collapse. Doom retreats, not defeated, but unresolved. The multiverse survives, but it is forever changed. Tony's legacy remains, not as a hero sacrifice, but as a warning written into reality itself. Endgame was never the ending. It was the moment the universe learned that intellect could replace gods, and that some ideas are too powerful to ever truly die. And somewhere beyond time, Doom waits, because as long as chaos exists, so will the need for him. If this theory made you question Endgame in a new way, like the video, share it, subscribe for more deep MCU stories, and consider supporting us with a $25 super thanks so we can keep building theories like this.